Mechwarrior Online by Piranha Games. Mechwarrior Online, although seen by few, or perhaps those that don't know much about it, as a first-person shooter, is actually a free-to-play vehicular combat game that traces its roots and themes back to the original franchise that became popular in the 90s, and actually goes back even further than that in the late 80s, with the first title being Battletech in 88 and the first Mechwarrior in 89. It's important to keep in mind that this is not a first-person shooter, something I had to remind myself going into the game since I am hardly a fan of vehicular combat period. As the in-game tutorial itself explains, controlling a battle mech is like controlling a tank, so this can be in a way compared to tanks rather than the mechs the newer generation has gotten used to from Hawken and Titanfall. I found a lot of frustration in my first introduction to the game, as I was really hoping they went for a more FPS styled system, but I will have been wrong and will not have stayed true to the franchise, so I get it. After settling myself down and giving it a shot with keeping in mind what it was supposed to be as opposed to what I wanted it to be, the game started all of a sudden to become a lot more fun. It is primarily based on online PvP matches, and also gives access to a pretty cool and fleshed out faction war mode, a mode that allows players to select one of many varying factions to join and then go forward waging war in defensive and offensive missions for territory control over a ridiculously large selection of planets for the battles to take place. The game can be described as a slower paced FPS with tactical thinking more than just rush down action and simply shooting. The graphics could be better, a lot better actually, considering that they are achieved with CryEngine, especially for the terrain. This does not mean that they are bad, they get the job done efficiently. Battle mechs look pretty good to very good, and the cockpit views kick ass aside from some lack of animations from the pilot and some smaller resolution textures on models, again mostly evident on the pilot's arms. That could be simply nitpicking, but to be honest, when you see it, it kind of throws you off from the immersion it already tried so hard to create with everything else. The online play seems very stable. I had hardly any trouble in any matches if at all, and the gameplay seems to be relatively balanced once you get to understand it. What I mean by this is that the game has a really hard learning curve if you want to buy a battle mech and outfit it with whatever technology and weapons you want. This learning curve comes from the fact that there are dozens of options, and at times the explanation for this is not efficient enough. Part comparisons are also hard to make, and you need to do all the searching manually to figure out what is what. After spending so much time on their in-game tutorial, you would think that they would at least give you the option for a battle mech builder tutorial that would explain some basics. On the upside, it is very detailed and gives you the feeling that you have control of everything that goes on in the battle mech, and that is true, you do. After enough time is spent on it, testing parts out and perhaps even wasting resources at times to try different builds, you start to grasp what the different systems and weapons are, their use and what kind of playstyle each one of them caters to. I, for example, suck at the whole tank movement thing. I simply hate it, to be honest, and I try my best to mimic first-person shooter movement when possible, but also remind myself to take advantage of the tank controls when I can. For this reason, I prefer the slower battle mech, where I can camp my ass further away and rain havoc on enemies with guided missiles and whatnot. There was a point where I managed to pull off some nice maneuvers with some faster mechs, but for the most part it's not my style, and I sum it up to pure luck rather than skill. Once you get into the habit of the game, whoa, you are in for a surprise. I find that I was having so much fun in this slower paced strategical gameplay than I expected. You have enough time to inform teammates of other battle mechs on grid locations on the map, formulate tactics and hopefully win. Having a microphone helps, a lot, and the immersion at that point is truly something. To touch up on the graphics, for the time the game was developed, they are quite good. For stable online matches, again they are really good, and with such a large variety of maps, I dare say some even look stunning. It's mostly the lack of geometry on hills that bummed me out, alongside some other things that, I'm kind of nitpicking on. With regards to its development, it has been made around 2 years now, I think, maybe more. A fact which I was not aware of, as it only just became available on Steam recently. To be honest, I had no idea this game existed, period. And looking at what went down, I think it went through development issues for a large time as well, and perhaps was even an unfinished product at the time. It even moved from ownership from one dev studio to another, unless I am mistaken. And if I got this right, I am assuming that an older group of devs that were going in the wrong direction with the game were probably let off the project to bring in new devs, which probably led to the Steam launch as well at last. I tried to put it all together, but found that I ended up caring less and less for the development backstory to it all the more I searched, and I simply left it at that. So in all honesty, I can't tell you exactly when this title went gold, what its previous versions or history was about, or anything of the sort, and luckily enough, none of that even matters. All I can talk about is the launch on Steam, and that is what I'm happily here to share my thoughts on. All in all, the game is what it promises to be. A vehicular combat game set in the Mechwarrior franchise. It stays true to that style, and its detailed battle mechanics and builds, movements and combat approach is for an advanced and in-depth take of that kind of gameplay. The game is not without a lack of grind, which is to be expected and completely okay. What bothers me, however, is the feeling I get that it has some pay-to-win elements to it. I can't say for sure, as some of these details seem to be really tricky on battle mech builds. And although some cash-only mechs seem to have certain advantages over some other mechs, I am assuming that it is all the result of further upgrades and profile progression which I have not had the pleasure to attain just yet. There is, however, some items in the game, like the airstrike, which are clearly pay to win. The cash-only versions of these airstrikes and some other items allow for smaller cooldowns. Although this is seemingly a small thing, it actually isn't. It's like being able to cast your pyroblast a couple seconds faster than everyone else in World of Warcraft for a price. I'm gonna have to restrain some of my judgment on this before I lash out on it and call it a pay-to-win title just yet, in fear I will wrongly accuse the title of something that is not true. I simply need to call it as it is, and I'm kind of getting the feeling, aside from that clear example with the skills, that there are some marginal pay-to-win elements here and there that the game gets away with because of its more complex mech build system, at which point it could be a lot more pay-to-win than we think, and be getting away with it under the radar. Either way, I advise caution in making up my mind on both ways. Vehicle combat players, FPS players that like slow-paced tactical warfare more, players that enjoy games whose complexity simulates immersion in mech building and mech war environment, and I think fans of the franchise can be really happy with this title too. If you are on the other hand into much faster gameplay, don't like vehicle controls like that of tanks, and care little for tactical warfare, this title will become truly frustrating with a steep learning curve to get you to the result that simply won't satisfy you anyway. If you like vehicle combat games, however want your arsenal to be in a simpler manner, then MWO can be a bit of a hassle. However, I truly think that if this is your kind of title, that it is worth it in the long run to get to know some of these details that can seem a little discouraging at a first glance. For the verdict to this game, I will have to be honest that the whole pay-to-win feel I am getting and seeing is making me deduct a point from each score that I will give. A very fair decision, I believe. If it is indeed pay to win, then I'm being quite forgiving with these scores, I think, and if it is purposefully trying to disguise its pay to win mechanics, then it should deserve an even smaller score. On the other hand, if it is actually hardly pay to win, then I think that 1 point is not really a big deal for something that feels as ambiguous as it does in this title. For the target group it is aimed at, and especially Mechwarrior fans, I think this title does it right. It has detail, it has variety, you can build your own mechs, there are plenty of maps to fight on, with the count being around 20 maps or so, and faction wars is also a blast. The tactical gameplay is spot on, and the roles of all the mechs do not feel redundant, although some classes are less used as they are more utility than combat. Fans of such a genre or the franchise should have a lot of addictive fun playing this game. It has room for improvement, but does not fall too short of it. Last of all, for players looking for this kind of gameplay, I will say this might be the single title out there to give you just what you're looking for. 8 out of 10. For the target groups out there that are not especially fans of such a gameplay, the elements that could keep you interested are only in the immersion of the battle mechs alone. MWO could end up being a very annoying title if it's not your cup of tea, more so than usual I think. If you are neither here neither there with it, it could actually end up proving for some unique fun, bringing the verdict to a 5 out of 10. My personal score? Well, I found a lot of frustration in learning the parts and builds of mechs and felt cheated at times, and that I was going up against opponents taking advantage of pay-to-win mechanics. I later found out that set of observations I had were simply my bad in not understanding the weapons correctly, thus throwing my pay-to-win notion completely off for the most part. These were things I could overcome quite easily. What stuck to me and what I can't overcome, however, is that whole tank-like vehicular movement. It simply annoys me and makes me feel restricted. Yet even so, the rest of my experience in the game was simply a blast. I, unexpectedly, had so much fun checking this title out. From the 20 hours or so of play, I can say that 15 of those were simply a blast, something I really didn't expect. The immersion, aside from the graphics at times, was top notch for me, and I found that for a kind of campy-like tactical war shooter, I had a lot more fun than I ever expected to have. Enough so that the title has me wanting more, a lot more. It made me a believer, I can say, and I am happy to give it a personal score of 8 out of 10. And that's it for my review on MWO, guys, adding up to a final verdict of 7 out of 10. If you've played Mechwarrior Online, let me know in the comments, what did you think of it? Do you agree with this score, or was this title really just a complete miss for you? As always, if you enjoyed this review, please hit the thumbs up, and if you like our videos, don't forget to subscribe for more right here on the digital creative front. This was Hazard Reborn, and I'll see you next time.